The explosive bullet hit him directly in the jaw at 10:47 a.m. Half his face was gone. His brain was exposed. Every doctor said he would die within the hour. But 7 days later, Simo Häyhä opened his eyes and changed medical history forever. Act 1. The moment before March 6, 1940. The Winter War was almost over. Peace negotiations were happening in Moscow. The fighting would end any day now. Simo Häyhä knew this. He had survived 98 days of the most brutal winter warfare in history. Just 2 more days and he could go home. Back to his farm. Back to his quiet life. Back to peace. He was lying in his usual position on the Kola front, the same ridge where he had spent nearly 100 days. The same snowbank that had become his second home. The same view of the forest valley where Soviet soldiers moved like shadows. His kill count, 505 confirmed. The highest in military history. But that morning, something felt different. The forest was too quiet. The usual sounds of distant artillery had stopped. No aircraft overhead. No movement in the valley below. Just silence. Simo had learned to trust his instincts. In 98 days of combat, his instincts had kept him alive when thousands of others had died. And right now, every instinct was screaming, "Something is wrong." He should have retreated. But what happened next would prove that even the greatest warrior can make one fatal mistake. At 10:42 a.m., a Soviet soldier appeared in his sight line. A standard infantryman, approximately 200 meters away, moving carelessly through the snow. An easy target. Too easy. Simo watched him through his iron sights. The soldier was walking in the open. No cover, no tactical awareness. Almost like he wanted to be seen. Bait. Simo had seen this tactic before. The Soviets would use a soldier as bait, hoping to draw out the Finnish sniper's position. Then their counter-sniper would take the shot. But Simo was confident. He had survived every counter-sniper team they had sent. He had killed at least 30 enemy marksmen who had tried to hunt him. He knew their tactics. He knew their patterns. He believed he was untouchable. That belief, that single moment of overconfidence, would cost him everything. Simo adjusted his position slightly, centered his rifle on the target, controlled his breathing, started to apply pressure to the trigger. He never saw the counter-sniper 400 meters to his left. Act 2. The shot that changed everything, 10:47 a.m. March 6, 1940. The explosive bullet traveled at 2,800 feet per second. It wasn't a standard round. Soviet command had authorized special ammunition specifically for counter-sniper operations. Explosive-tipped rounds designed not just to kill, but to obliterate the target completely. The bullet entered through Simo's left cheek. The explosion happened inside his mouth. His jaw shattered into 47 separate pieces. His teeth were blown out. The left side of his face simply disappeared. The explosive force continued through his palate, destroying the roof of his mouth, fracturing his skull, and exposing brain tissue. He collapsed instantly. Finnish soldiers 300 meters away heard the shot echo through the forest. They recognized the distinctive sound of an explosive round. They knew what it meant. The White Death was finally dead. 2 soldiers, Imo and Jussi, were the first to reach him. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. But what they discovered in those next 30 seconds defied every law of medicine and survival. Simo was lying face up in the snow. His face was unrecognizable. Blood was everywhere, soaking the snow, pooling around his head, covering his white camouflage uniform. The entire left side of his face was missing. They could see inside his mouth cavity. They could see exposed bone. They could see brain matter. Amo dropped to his knees. He's gone. There's no way. Then Jussi saw something impossible. Simo's right eye moved. Not much. Just a slight shift, focusing on nothing in particular. But it moved, which meant his brain was still functioning. He's alive, Jussi screamed. But how? The injury was catastrophic. No one survives an explosive round to the face. The trauma alone should have stopped his heart instantly. The blood loss should have killed him in seconds. The brain exposure to freezing temperature should have caused immediate death. Yet somehow, impossibly, Simo Häyhä was still breathing. Imo checked for a pulse. It was there, weak, barely detectable, but present. They had to make a decision immediately. They were in active combat zone. Soviet forces were less than 500 meters away. Moving Simo could kill him. But staying meant certain death for all three of them, Usi. Looked at Imo. We carry him out. He won't survive the movement. He won't survive staying here. Either, they wrapped Simo's head in, whatever cloth they could find, trying to stop the bleeding. But the wound was too massive. Blood kept pouring out. His breathing became more shallow. His pulse weaker. They lifted him as gently as possible. Simo didn't make a sound. He couldn't. His jaw was destroyed. His mouth was gone. The extraction took 40 minutes through snow, under occasional Soviet fire, carrying a man who should have been dead. Every step they expected him to die. Every minute they checked his pulse, certain it would be gone. It never stopped. ACT-3, the field hospital, 173M Kola Field Hospital. Dr. Henrik Wahlberg was performing surgery on a soldier with a leg wound when the doors burst open. Two soldiers carried in what looked like a corpse. The White Death, Imo said. He's still alive. Dr. Wahlberg looked at Simo's face and immediately knew this was impossible. He had been a surgeon for 15 years. He had seen every type of combat wound. He had treated hundreds of soldiers during this war, but he had never seen anyone survive an injury like this. The entire mandible was shattered. The maxilla was fractured in multiple places. Teeth were gone. Tongue was partially severed. Soft palate destroyed. Skull fracture extending to the temporal bone. Brain tissue visible and potentially damaged. Any one of these injuries alone would be life-threatening. All of them together? Medical science said it was impossible to survive. But Simo's heart was still beating. And what Dr. Wahlberg discovered during the emergency surgery would rewrite medical textbooks. They laid Simo on the operating table. No anesthesia was available. He was already unconscious from trauma. Dr. Wahlberg began the emergency procedure with one goal: stop the bleeding and close the wound enough to give him a chance. But as he worked, he noticed something extraordinary. The explosive bullet had entered at an angle. Instead of traveling straight through his brain, it had deflected off the inside of his skull. The trajectory should have killed him instantly. But the unusual bone density in Simo's skull, likely strengthened by years of physical labor and exposure to harsh conditions, had caused the bullet fragments to ricochet at a survivable angle, 1 centimeter different, and he would have died instantly. Half a degree angle change and his brainstem would have been severed. Pure chance? Or had Simo's lifetime of survival instincts somehow positioned his head at the exact angle needed to survive? Dr. Wahlberg would spend the rest of his life wondering. The surgery took 4 hours. They removed 23 bullet fragments. They reconstructed what remained of his jaw using wire and whatever bone pieces they could salvage. They closed the massive facial wound with 47 stitches. They stopped the bleeding, but they all knew the truth. Even if his body survived, his brain had been oxygen-deprived for too long. The exposure to freezing temperature had likely caused massive neurological damage. The trauma was too severe. If he lived, he would never wake up. Dr. Wahlberg wrote in his medical notes, "Patient will not survive the night. Even if heart continues, brain function is almost certainly ceased. Recommend comfort measures only." They moved Simo to a recovery room, a quiet, dark space where soldiers went to die in peace. Day 1, March 6th, evening. Simo didn't die. His pulse remained steady. His breathing, though shallow, continued. His body temperature, despite the massive injury, stabilized at 36.8 degrees Celsius, but he showed no signs of consciousness. No response to pain, no reaction to light, no indication that his brain was functioning beyond the most basic autonomic responses. The nurses checked on him every hour, expecting each visit to be their last time seeing him alive. Day 2, March 7th. News spread through the Finnish military. The White Death had been killed. Officers held quiet memorials. Soldiers who had served with him told stories. The Soviet army celebrated. Their greatest enemy was finally dead. Except he wasn't. In that dark recovery room, Simo's heart kept beating. Hour after hour, his body refusing to accept what medical science said was inevitable. Dr. Wahlberg visited him multiple times. Each time he expected to pronounce the time of death. Each time he found a stable pulse, it made no sense. But on day 3, something happened that would make doctors question everything they knew about human survival. Day 3. March 8th, 3 p.m. Nurse Elsa was checking Simo's bandages when she noticed something. His right hand, the one not covered by blankets, had moved. Not a spasm. Not an involuntary twitch. A deliberate movement. His fingers had curled slightly as if trying to grip something. She called Dr. Wahlberg immediately. They ran tests. Shined lights in his remaining eye. Applied pressure to his fingertips. Called his name. No response. No reaction. Nothing. Had she imagined the movement? Was it just wishful thinking? But that night, 2 different nurses reported the same thing. His hand had moved. And his breathing pattern had changed, becoming slightly deeper, more regular. Day 4. March 9th. Soviet artillery had stopped completely. The war was ending. Peace treaty signatures were being finalized in Moscow. Within 48 hours, Finland would officially cede territory but maintain independence. Simo Häyhä had helped hold the line long enough for Finland to survive. But he would never know it. He remained unconscious, trapped somewhere between life and death, or so everyone thought. Day 5, March 10th. His remaining eye moved. Nurse Elsa saw it clearly this time. She was changing his bandages when his right eye, the one that survived, shifted focus. It moved left, then right, as if scanning the room. But when she spoke to him, when she called his name, there was no response. The eye went still again. Dr. Wahlberg was called. He examined Simo thoroughly, checked pupil responses, tested reflexes, monitored brain activity as best he could with the limited equipment available. His conclusion: some brain function returning. But consciousness unlikely. These may be involuntary responses. Do not get your hopes up. Day 6, March 11th. The peace treaty was signed. The Winter War was officially over. Finland had survived against all odds, against overwhelming force, against impossible circumstances. In the recovery room, Simo Häyhä's survival was becoming equally impossible to explain. His pulse was strengthening. His breathing was improving. His body temperature was normal. The massive facial wound was showing early signs of healing, something that should have been impossible, given the severity and the risk of infection, but he remained unconscious. Medical theory said he should be dead. Military doctors from other hospitals came to examine him, trying to understand how he was still alive. None of them had answers. One doctor from Helsinki said, "This is impossible. I've seen similar injuries. They always result in death within 48 hours, either from blood loss, shock, infection, or brain death. He should not be alive, but he was." And on day 7, the miracle everyone had stopped believing in finally happened. A-Seat 5, the Awakening March, 13th, 1940. 6:47 a.m., Nurse Elsa was doing her morning rounds. She had checked on Simo first, as she had done every morning for 7 days. She expected the same thing she had seen every previous morning: an unconscious soldier, hovering in the space between life and death. But when she entered the room, something was different. His remaining eye was open. Not just open, focused, alert, aware. And it was looking directly at her. She froze. "Simo?" The eye blinked. Once. Deliberately. She dropped the tray she was carrying and ran for Dr. Wahlberg. When the doctor arrived 2 minutes later, Simo Häyhä's eye followed him as he entered the room. A clear, conscious, aware movement. "Simo, can you hear me?" Dr. Wahlberg asked. Blink. Once. Blink once for yes, twice for no. Do you understand? Blink. Once Dr. Wahlberg felt his own hands shaking. In 15 years of medicine, he had never seen anything like this. The man before him should be dead 7 times over. Instead, he was conscious, aware, responding. Are you in pain? 2 blinks. No, this was impossible. But it was happening. They ran every test they could. His cognitive function appeared intact. His memory seemed functional. When asked if he remembered being shot, he blinked once for yes. His motor control was limited but present. He could move his remaining fingers, flex his toes, shift his shoulders slightly. The only things he couldn't do: speak. His jaw was destroyed. Eat, his mouth was reconstructed, or move his head. The injury was still too severe. But he was alive, and conscious, and aware. But here's what nobody knew at that moment. The true battle for survival was just beginning. The next 3 months were agony. Simo couldn't eat. They had to feed him through a tube. Every meal was painful. Every swallow was a struggle. He couldn't speak. His jaw was wired shut, healing slowly. Any attempt at communication was through blinks and slight hand movements. He couldn't sleep properly. The pain was constant. They had morphine, but supplies were limited. He endured most of the pain without medication. Infection set in twice. Each time, doctors thought it would finally kill him. Each time, his body somehow fought it off. The facial reconstruction required 3 additional surgeries, each one risking his life again. Each one somehow impossibly succeeding. Physical therapy was brutal. Learning to move his jaw again. Learning to eat solid food again. Learning to speak again, though his voice would never sound the same. And through all of it, Simo never complained. The nurses said he was the quietest patient they had ever had. Not because he couldn't speak. After the first month, he could manage basic words. But because he chose not to. When asked if he needed anything, he would shake his head. When asked if he was in pain, he would blink twice. No, even when they could clearly see he was suffering. One nurse, years later, was interviewed about her time caring for Simo. She said, "I've seen strong men cry from wounds less severe than his. I've seen soldiers beg for death from pain that was nothing compared to what he endured. But Simo, he just endured. Like pain was just another enemy to defeat." June 1940. 3 months after the shot. For the first time since the injury, Simo asked to see a mirror. The nurses exchanged worried glances. They had been dreading this moment. They knew what he would see. They knew how devastating it would be. Dr. Wahlberg brought a small hand mirror. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Simo nodded. "Once?" Firm. They held the mirror up. The man looking back was unrecognizable. The entire left side of his face was sunken, the bone structure completely altered. Massive scarring covered what had been smooth skin. His mouth was asymmetrical, pulled to one side by the reconstruction. His jaw jutted at an unnatural angle. His cheek was collapsed inward where bone had been lost. This wasn't the face of Simo Häyhä, the farmer. This was the face of a monster from a nightmare. The nurses waited for his reaction, waited for the breakdown they had seen from other disfigured soldiers. Waited for tears, screams, denial. Simo stared at his reflection for 30 seconds, then handed the mirror back. "That's all?" Nurse Elsa asked, shocked. Simo spoke for the first time in weeks. His voice was distorted, slurred, difficult to understand. But the words were clear: "I'm alive. That's all that matters." But what he did next would prove that his spirit was even harder to kill than his body. Within 2 weeks, Simo insisted on starting advanced physical therapy. The doctors said he needed more recovery time. He ignored them and began exercising in his room. Within a month, he was walking without assistance. His balance was perfect, despite the severe head trauma. His coordination was intact, despite the neurological damage. Within 2 months, he asked for a rifle. The military psychiatrist strongly advised against it. The trauma of holding a weapon again could trigger severe psychological damage. He needs time to process what happened. Simo didn't care about psychology. He wanted to know if he could still shoot. They took him to a firing range. Gave him the same model Mosin Nagant he had used during the war. Set up targets at 100 meters. His hands shook as he lifted the rifle. Not from fear, from muscles that hadn't performed this action in 4 months. He aimed. The rifle sight was difficult to align with his remaining eye and altered depth perception. His jaw ached from the recoil position. His scarred face pulled uncomfortably against the stock. He fired. Bullseye. Dead center. Second shot. Bullseye. Third shot. Bullseye. The range officers stared in disbelief. This man had been shot in the face with an explosive round 4 months ago. His face was destroyed. His jaw was reconstructed. His depth perception was permanently altered, and he was shooting better than soldiers with perfect health. How? One officer asked. Simo's response, delivered in his now distorted voice, became legendary in Finnish military circles. The gun didn't change. The target didn't change. Only my face changed. And I don't shoot with my face. Act 7. The life after death Simo Häyhä was medically discharged from the Finnish military in August 1940. He returned to his farm in Rautjärvi, the same small village he had left 10 months earlier. But everything was different now. The village held a celebration for his return. They called him a hero, a legend. The man who survived the impossible. Simo didn't attend. He was uncomfortable with attention. He had always been a quiet man. Now, with his disfigured face and distorted voice, he was even more withdrawn. But he didn't hide. He refused to be a victim. He farmed. He hunted. He lived. Children in the village were initially afraid of his appearance. Parents would pull them away when he walked by. But Simo never showed anger. He would wave, smile as best he could with his reconstructed face, continue on his way. Slowly, the village accepted him again. Not as a war hero, not as the White Death, just as Simo, the quiet farmer who survived something impossible. Years passed. The disfigurement never healed completely, but he adapted. He learned to eat normally again, though certain foods were impossible. He learned to speak clearly enough to be understood, though his voice remained distorted. He learned to live with constant low-level pain that would never go away, and he never complained. Journalists occasionally found him. Wanted to interview him about the war, about his 505 kills, about being shot in the face and surviving. He would answer their questions politely but briefly. How did you survive being shot in the face? I didn't die. What went through your mind when you saw your face? Relief that I could still see. Do you have nightmares about the war? Sometimes. What advice would you give to young soldiers? Don't get shot in the face. That last response became famous. It was pure Simo, practical, understated, with a dark humor that only someone who had survived the impossible could possess. But the most shocking part of his story wasn't his survival. It was what happened decades later. In 1998, at the age of 92, Simo was interviewed by a Finnish documentary crew. They asked him about the moment he was shot, about those 7 days of unconsciousness, about what he experienced. His answer changed how doctors think about consciousness and near-death experiences. I remember everything, he said. The interviewer was confused. But you were unconscious. My body was unconscious. I was not. He described being aware of the soldiers carrying him, hearing their conversation, feeling the pain but being unable to respond, being in the operating room, listening to Dr. Wahlberg tell the nurses he wouldn't survive. I wanted to tell him I would survive, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only listen and wait those 7 days. He was conscious for all of them, trapped in a body that wouldn't respond, listening to everyone say he would die, hearing nurses cry because they thought he couldn't hear them, feeling every painful procedure. Why didn't you show any signs? The interviewer asked. My body was too damaged to respond, but I was there, thinking, planning, surviving. Medical experts who reviewed this interview were stunned. This suggested that consciousness and physical responsiveness might be far more separate than previously believed, that some coma patients might be fully aware but unable to communicate. The implications were enormous, and it all came from a farmer who was shot in the face and refused to die. At 8, the final years Simo Häyhä lived to be 96 years old. Let that sink in for a moment. A man shot in the face with an explosive round. A man whose brain was exposed to freezing temperatures. A man who every doctor said would die within hours. Lived for 62 more years. He outlived most of the soldiers who fought alongside him. He outlived the doctors who saved him. He outlived the Soviet soldiers who tried to kill him. In his 90s, he still went hunting. Still walked through the Finnish forests where he had once fought. Still practiced shooting, though his accuracy had finally started to decline. When he turned 96, journalists asked for his secret to longevity. Stay out of wars. Don't get shot. And if you do get shot, don't die. Even at 96, his dark humor was intact. His final interview was conducted 3 months before his death in 2002. The interviewer asked him one last question. Looking back at everything, the war, the 505 kills being shot, surviving the impossible, what do you think it all meant? Simo thought for a long time, longer than he had thought about any other question in the interview. Finally, he answered, "It meant I was supposed to survive. For what reason, I don't know. Maybe just to show that humans are harder to kill than we think. Maybe to remind people that giving up is a choice. Or maybe for no reason at all. But I survived, and that's enough." April 1st, 2002. Simo Häyhä died peacefully in his sleep at a veterans' nursing home. No dramatic final words, no deathbed revelation. Just a quiet end for a man who had lived an impossible life. At his funeral, Finnish military officials, veterans, historians, and hundreds of civilians attended. The president of Finland gave a eulogy calling him the embodiment of Finnish resilience. But the most touching moment came from Dr. Antti Wahlberg, son of the doctor who had operated on Simo 62 years earlier. He read from his father's journal, an entry written the day Simo woke up. "Today I witnessed something I cannot explain. A man who should have died 7 times survived. Medical science says this is impossible, but I am learning that medicine does not account for human will. Simo Häyhä did not survive because of my surgery. He survived because he chose to, because some part of him, some core of his being, simply refused to die. I will remember this patient for the rest of my life. He taught me that sometimes the human spirit is the best medicine we have." Today, Simo Häyhä's medical records are studied in universities worldwide. Neuroscience departments use his case to understand consciousness during severe trauma. Surgical textbooks reference his facial reconstruction as an example of impossible healing. Psychology programs analyze his mental resilience and lack of PTSD despite extreme trauma. But here's what they don't tell you in those academic papers. In 2019, a group of Finnish researchers used modern technology to analyze the trajectory of the bullet that hit Simo. Using medical records, X-rays, and ballistic analysis, they recreated the exact path of the explosive round. Their conclusion shocked the military community. The bullet's trajectory had a 0.2% chance of being survivable. 99.8% of the time, that exact shot would have killed instantly. The angle of Simo's head at the moment of impact had to be within 2.3 degrees of the actual angle to survive. Any variation, and he would have died immediately. Was it luck? Was it positioning? Was it instinct? The researchers couldn't say, but they concluded with this statement. Either Simo Häyhä was the luckiest man in military history, or some subconscious survival instinct positioned him at the exact angle needed to survive. We may never know which, but maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the real question is, what would you do with a second chance like that? Simo chose to live quietly, to farm, to hunt, to be normal. He didn't seek fame. He didn't write books. He didn't give speeches. He just survived and lived and reminded everyone that sometimes just being alive is the greatest victory of all. That's The true legacy of the man who was shot in the face and refused to die. The White Death. Simo Häyhä. The soldier who proved that death itself can be defeated by sheer will to live. Want to know how Simo got 505 kills in 100 days? Watch the full story appearing now.